New York's budget faces its deadline, but once again, it will not be passed on time as the governor signals that she and the legislature need more time. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. New York State's budget deadline has come and gone. The fiscal year began yesterday, April 1st. On Thursday, the governor let it be known that more work needs to be done to iron out some details. Speaking with New York Public Radio's Karen DeWitt, the governor says, quote, "It's becoming clear that the budget will not be meeting the April 1 deadline. But as I have said all along, it's not about a race to a deadline. It's about a race to getting the right results." There are several key proposals we know of that remain undecided in this process. One big item, likely causing some of the delay, bail reform. Neither the Senate nor the Assembly included the governor's proposed changes in their one-house budgets. All right, and joining us now with additional insight on the budget process, Blair Horner, Executive Director of the New York Public Interest Research Group. Always just nice to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So, busy time of year for you and for a lot of people. Once again, the budget deadline has come and gone. On Thursday, the governor was on with Karen DeWitt, and she says it's not about a race to a deadline, it's about a race to getting the right results. Is she correct in saying so?
Well, every time the budget's late, people start the conversation about, well, we'll make it timely. That's usually one thing. And the other is that a good budget is better than an on-time budget, as if they're mutually exclusive. But, you know, as a practical matter, depending on how late the budget is, it really may or may not have much of an effect on anybody. But, you know, they're supposed to have it done by April 1st, and they didn't. Sometimes
in years past, we know it's been very late. Other times, there was a stretch of time I remember not too long ago when they seemingly were on time for quite a stretch there. Aside from, you know, the law stating, hey, this is when the fiscal year starts, really what is the biggest benefit to really having this done and ready to go April 1st?
Well, New York is unusual in the sense it has a fiscal year that starts on April 1st. Right. Sometimes I wonder if that is because people had a good sense of humor when they picked that particular date. Yeah. But most states start on July 1st. Mm-hmm. And so New York has a very truncated period. It's always a time crunch to get it done by April 1st. But if you do that, then you have the remainder of the session, which goes into the middle of June, to focus on the policy issues that are not tremendously impacting the budget. And so where the tension is because of the way New York State's Constitution is organized. The governor has tremendous power in the budget, and so she's using the budget process to drive policy issues, some of which have very little to do with the budget, but it's because she has leverage. And so that slows down the parade, particularly if there's opposition.
Also, the Democrats, with that supermajority, do they kind of, with one party in such control of the entire process, does that often become a hindrance as well?
Well, I don't know if it becomes a hindrance. It is now, though. Yeah. Even though they're all supposedly on the same team, there are differences in opinion. Kathy Hochul is from Western New York and viewed as not as progressive as New York City legislators, which tend to dominate both chambers. And so there is tension there, and where you see it playing out is it really over the issue of bail reform, which the governor is pushing hard on, and there's a lot of resistance in the legislature. Now, the connection to the budget is, of course, everything's connected to the budget, but it's not really a budget item. Mm-hmm. But this is a clear example, and it happened last year, too, where the governor used the budget process to make changes into bail that she wanted to see done. And so, you know, how that plays out, it's hard to tell. Right now, we're only reading tea leaves, but how that all plays out, ultimately, they're going to have to come to some sort of agreement to get the budget done even remotely close to on time.
So she comes out, and this whole process, too, is kind of, at least still remains funny to me. So the governor comes out with her, what's known as the executive proposal. Then we have the one-house budgets, which is the Assembly and the Senate each come out with their own versions, and then we somehow work together to mash the three of them together.
Yes, is the short answer. Yeah. The reason you might feel like it's sort of weird is because once they get their one-house budgets out, there's very little public ability to observe what's happening. And so they're hammering all these deals out behind closed doors. And the way it's sort of this, it's a weird process where until everything's done, nothing can get done. And so if a big ticket item, for example, bail, is holding up the budget parade, None of the other negotiations can what they call close,
Sure.
because you have to leave them open until the final agreement is made in case there's some last-minute horse trading. It makes it, in a sense, easier because theoretically, again, they're all on the same team, they're all Democrats, and so the tension, the normal bipartisan tension that you have is not there. And so, you know, again, the governor has a lot of leverage in the budget process. The way all the noise was this past week is that they'll come to an agreement in the first half of April, but we'll see.
Now, you've written recently a lot about climate change and the things New York can do to work towards that. That has been a subject of items in the budget as well. I know most famously recently we've talked about eliminating natural gas, and the governor coming out with a proposal that any new construction in the state would not include natural gas. Is the state moving in the right direction? And then, of course, there are still a lot of people out there that look at the science and say, well, this really isn't real. But the bottom line is, if you believe the scientists, this is a big issue.
Yeah,
Needs to
I
be
mean,
addressed.
this is not one of those issues where you can sort of fiddle around on the edges. According to the world's experts, by the middle of this century, we have to get off the use of fossil fuels. And, you know, that's not, you can't just wait until 2049 to do that. You have to put policies in place to achieve those goals. What the governor and the legislature are talking about is future new construction would be powered by power lines as compared to gas hookups, because once you build pipelines, they have to run for 20, 30 years for them to be economically viable. So you can't really invest in something you have to get rid of. So there's that. The other big issue, which really hasn't been grappled in the budget, is the staggering costs of dealing with floods from more intense storms, rising sea levels, hotter school buildings, and right now, everyone watching this show and you and me are on the hook to pick up for around $100 billion in additional costs. That's going to come out of our tax dollars unless somebody adopts something different. And we've been pushing for making the oil companies pick up a big substantial portion of the tab, because we're in this problem because they didn't tell us the truth. And by the way, they have the money. They have incredible record profits over the last 2 years. So let's put them on the hook and ease the burden for taxpayers and ratepayers.
And those who stand in opposition would say the current electrical infrastructure we have isn't up to par, and it's almost cost prohibitive to bring it up to par with this plan.
Yeah, I know, but there's no doubt that we have to modernize the grid. That has to happen anyway.
Right.
And as a practical matter, if you believe the world's experts, you have to get off fossil fuels by the middle of the century. And there's really no other way to deal with this problem. I mean, there's geothermal, there may be new technologies that come online, maybe batteries for people's homes that could take the place of a propane-powered generator, for example. There's lots of things that can still happen. But looking ahead, from 25 years from now, which maybe for the younger viewers seems like a long time, for the older viewers like me, it seems like yesterday. It's one of the, you have to put building blocks in place now in order to achieve that science-based goal.
Real quick, over, under on having a budget by June 1.
I think they'll have it by June 1. The governor can jam the legislature if she wants to, and I think they're going to try to come to an agreement in April.
Blair Horner, Executive Director at NYPIRG. Thanks so much, Blair. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Marijuana advocates are pushing for funding changes in the state budget. When we return, we speak with the Cannabis Control Board's Senior Policy Director on how the budget could impact that growing cannabis industry. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. Members of the Cannabis Association of New York made a final push to have their priorities added to the spending plan this week. Advocates calling for the legislature to repeal the THC potency tax, which imposes greater taxes on products that have a higher concentration of THC, the compound in marijuana that makes you high. They've also pushed for additional action from the governor when it comes to the illicit cannabis market. All right, and joining us now with more on the progress made so far with the state's legal cannabis market, Axel Burnaby, Senior Policy Director with the Office of Cannabis Management. Axel, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here with you.
So we're into the budget now. Before we get to some budget issues, let's just talk about the rollout of these shops so far. Of course, a lot of people would like to see it happen a lot faster. How do you think things have been going?
Well, overall, this week in particular, we got some really good news on that front. The Second Circuit essentially didn't overturn, but really narrowed the scope of the injunction that had been preventing us from announcing a lot of the winners in 5 regions across the state. They narrowed it down to the Finger Lakes region only. So on Monday, we'll be announcing pretty much 100 new licensees that will be hitting the ground and starting to open their dispensaries. So I think we're more than doubling the number by Monday, and that should really turbocharge the rollout. We of course have the supply already online from our small upstate farmers, and the manufacturers have also been producing. So that supply chain's strong, and we're trying to just grow it as quickly as possible.
Beautiful. And we've been in the tail end of budget season here. Unfortunately, we know the budget will not be on time this year. But one of the things you and the commission have been pushing for is a repeal of the potency tax. Can you explain to viewers that may not know what that is and the reason for that action?
So we typically don't comment on sort of pending legislation and budget negotiations, but I can tell you my understanding of what the effort here is. There is a tax that's there are essentially two taxes on the way we tax cannabis under the cannabis law. One's at retail, which is what you'd expect, a sales tax at the retail level, an excise tax there, and then one's a wholesale tax. So at the distribution level, what we do is we tax THC, which is the amount of THC, which is the sort of mind-altering compound in cannabis that is in a particular product. The higher that THC level, the higher the tax. And so folks are finding that the level of tax there is too high. They want to shift some of that down at retail. And we're letting, as long as it's sort of budget neutral for us, as long as it still ensures that the government collects the taxes that it needs to collect, we're letting that play out over here at the OCM.
Now, aside from the legal market that's really getting up and running here, and we've talked about this before, there's still those illicit shops out there, those illegal shops that the state has really been trying to crack down on. From your point of view and from the office's point of view, is the state doing enough to kind of keep those illicit shops at bay?
Yeah, no, we've really taken a much harder line approach across the board on this. It's been a while. We've been shutting folks down on a regular basis. We've been levying fines. There's a bill right now that's being negotiated that, you might have seen the announcement last week from the governor that would give considerably more, greater powers to the OCM, greater fining ability, and, sort of put landlords on guard as well that this impacts everybody and that they need to take action against the tenants that are clearly violating the law. So I think we have a no tolerance here for folks that are getting ahead of the line and trying to open up dispensaries before the legal ones are in place. There's a process to apply for licenses that's coming in the fall. There was already licenses that obviously are being approved as we're speaking now, and there's just no tolerance for people that are willing to break the law and sell products that are contaminated, dangerous, and then quite frankly sell them to children, sell them in stores that are advertising that are just everywhere. So that is not okay. So we're really focused on that, and we're looking forward to getting that bill as well. And we're working with our local law enforcement partners that are also stepping up the effort. So I think their time is very limited, and folks should be seriously considering whether they want to keep doing this.
And you mentioned the licensing process. Of course, the first licenses that have already gone out to those nonprofits and to those who have been or either served time for under the previous cannabis laws here in the state. They were the ones who benefited first. Will the licensing process be similar for the next round of folks that will be able to start doing that in the fall?
So that licensing process is going to include everybody.
Okay.
Everybody's going to be able to apply for licenses. Of course, under the cannabis law, we will attempt to prioritize certain populations or treat everybody according to sort of their background and where they're coming from. But it is going to be an open application period, and it will not require you to be convicted of a cannabis related possession offense or anything of that nature. So no, this was really leading. The program we had here was really recognizing, being intentional about taking very specific population that had really suffered the most from the the criminalization of cannabis and putting them in a pole position up front. So that we're very proud of our efforts that way. No state has really been able to do it successfully. I think we have. Of course, it takes time and effort, but no, come the fall, it's going to open and everybody will be able to participate.
And what's the feedback been like, Axel, from those who have gotten their shops open already? Have they been pleased with the steps? I know, again, some of them wish it were, you know, a little bit quicker than they realized, but have they been pleased with the process so far?
So far, so good. Yes, so far it seems that New Yorkers really do prefer a legal alternative to consume cannabis, and that they're willing to pay. Actually, the prices are fairly comparable, to be honest. So, but they would be willing to pay even a little bit more to get tested, safe products. So the response has been overwhelming. Sales have been very strong. One of our biggest obstacles really is federal prohibition when it comes to taxes. So these businesses would be extraordinarily profitable. They're profitable now, but would be extraordinarily profitable if we could remove this 280E provision in the federal tax code that doesn't allow them to deduct their ordinary business expenses. So the federal government's lack of action in this space is really just choking off our small businesses. We've focused on small businesses so we don't have to give the licenses, only to large multinational interests. We want to have a bit of everything, but the small businesses are having the hardest time because of this federal inaction. So we really want to call on our federal partners to really work with us to remove that. But other than that, really, New Yorkers are ready for a legal, regulated and taxed alternative.
And from what I understand, that leads me into our final question. For the longest time, this was because of the federal prohibitions, this was a cash-only business. But from what I understand, are credit cards now able to be used?
Not quite credit cards, but we do have ACH payments, debit cards. So you can use the debit card. You can use direct pay where you transfer, online. There are payment services vendors that are in that space to make it really as seamless as possible. But until that federal banking issue gets resolved, it will be difficult to use credit cards because they're interstate, and so they're crossing state lines with their networks. So we're still not quite there on credit cards, unfortunately.
Axel Burnaby, Senior Policy Director at the Office for Cannabis Management. Always appreciate the insight from the OCM. Axel, thanks for your time.
Anytime at all. Thank you very much.
You got it. All right, coming up, New York lawmakers setting their sights on preventing future school tragedies. Details from the latest report on school safety and security. And remember, if you've got a comment or story idea, please let us know. You can always email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. School safety on the minds of many after yet another mass shooting at a Christian elementary school in Nashville. And then the multiple false reports of shootings, those swatting incidents at school districts all over the state this past week. The Assembly minority updating New Yorkers on the latest from the Task Force on School Safety and Security. Our Capitol correspondent Amel Taleji has that story.
The task force has met up a total of 6 times. They traveled around the state listening to parents, faculty, and law enforcement on ways to better protect our youth and prevent further tragedies from taking place. 2 key takeaways from those meetings was open communication and mental health. Dr. Michael Prezioso explains.
The ability for mental health professionals, school professionals, parents, teachers, guidance counselors, law enforcement, all to be able to speak with each other together about relevant issues is going to be critical in moving things forward in terms of promoting school safety.
Assemblymember and co-chair Michael Riley says the task force did discuss the possibility for police officers and EMTs to recommend youth be brought in for an evaluation when there's an incident of crisis.
Right now, that's a very difficult task. They don't have the authority to do that. EMTs, they're first responders, so that may be something that we think would be good policy.
There was also discussion of implementing more school resource officers.
They balance being law enforcement, being teachers, and sometimes even being counselors to students and staff members and the entire school community. You know, they're an outlet for people to have a conversation with.
Assemblymember Scott Gray has proposed legislation that would make school swatting a Class E felony.
You're not only diverting police resources to a particular address or to a school or something in that instance, it's also very intimidating to people. It's a serious issue.
The Assembly member hoping to get that legislation passed this session. In Albany, Amel Taleji.
Thanks to Amel. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin joins lawmakers in D.C. to push for legislation that could save lives. Details on that coming up. All right, and finally from us here on Empire State Weekly, Damar Hamlin joined New York Senator Chuck Schumer to introduce legislation that will increase access to automated external defibrillators, AEDs, in schools. The bill would bring the life-saving technology to both public and private schools.
The Access to AEDs Act will help ensure that schools are just as prepared and trained to respond in a time of crisis as those on the sideline of an NFL game. And it will also support the purchase of AEDs for schools and help create cardiac emergency response plans. Combined, these efforts will help protect kids and reduce deaths in schools across the country.
Incredible. Hamlin advocating for the new measure nearly 3 months after his collapse, you'll remember, on the field from cardiac arrest. All right, for now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. Don't forget, you can catch Empire State Weekly all over New York. Here's the full schedule of where you can see us on 10 television stations across the state.